The war was finally over. Bran Stark had been crowned king of the Six Kingdoms. Peace had finally returned to Westeros. At least, that's what everyone believed. But Arya Stark was never meant to live a quiet life. She left King's Landing and sailed to Storm's End, where she reunited with Gendry Baratheon. After telling him about the dream she'd carried for years to discover what lay west of Westeros, Gendry agreed to help her. Together they assembled a crew. Skilled sailors, experienced explorers, and fearless warriors answered the call. Even a handful of people from Winterfell volunteered to join the expedition. When everything was finally ready, Arya gave the order. The ship raised its sails, and their journey into the unknown officially began. For days, then weeks, the ocean never seemed to end. No land, no islands, no birds, no sign that anyone had ever sailed this far before. Every direction looked exactly the same. Nothing but endless water. The crew had only packed enough food and supplies to survive for a month. But after 42 days, they were still surrounded by nothing but the sea. By then, every last piece of food had been eaten. The drinking water was almost gone. The crew grew weaker with each passing day. Some had become so exhausted they could barely stand. Even worse, the firewood they carried, needed to boil water and cook whatever little they might find, would only last another 2 weeks. For the first time since the voyage began, fear spread across the ship. Whispers slowly turned into complaints. Some of the crew began blaming Arya. Others quietly admitted they never should have followed her into the unknown. Hope was disappearing. Then, one morning, someone standing at the front of the ship suddenly froze. Land, far off in the distance, barely visible through the morning haze, an island. The crew couldn't believe their eyes. With the little strength they had left, everyone rushed to the oars. Every remaining ounce of energy went into reaching that shore. Hours later, they finally stepped onto solid ground. It felt like coming back to life. No one cared where they were. No one asked questions. The only thing that mattered was food. The crew scattered in every direction, grabbing and eating anything they could find. Arya was no different. She walked into a small bakery and immediately started devouring freshly baked pies and warm bread. After more than 6 weeks at sea, it was the best meal she'd ever tasted. But just as she finally began to relax, something felt wrong. She suddenly had the unmistakable feeling that someone was watching her. She immediately looked over her shoulder. No one. Just strangers going about their day. Arya brushed it off. Maybe it was just exhaustion. Once she'd finally eaten enough to satisfy her hunger, she smiled to herself and decided to explore the island. According to the locals, the place was called Gatlinburg. Everything felt peaceful, normal, almost too normal. As Arya walked through one of the quieter streets, a figure suddenly lunged from behind. A blade flashed toward her neck, but Arya's instincts kicked in instantly. She twisted away at the last possible second. Steel clashed. The street erupted into chaos. The mysterious attacker was fast, unbelievably fast. Every strike was precise, every movement calculated. The fight dragged on for several intense minutes. But Arya Stark had survived the Night King. She had survived the House of Black and White. She wasn't about to lose now. Finding the smallest opening, she drove needles straight through the attacker's heart. The man collapsed, dead. Arya knelt beside the body. His clothes immediately caught her attention. They looked almost identical to the uniforms worn by members of her own crew. Thinking one of her people had somehow attacked her, she carried the body back to the ship. Gathering everyone together, she asked a simple question. Does anyone know this man? One after another, every member of the crew stepped forward. Each looked closely at the body. Each gave the same answer. No. No one had ever seen him before. Confused, Arya decided to search his pockets herself. But as she leaned closer, she noticed something chilling. The man's face was changing. The features she'd fought only moments earlier slowly shifted into someone else's. Arya immediately understood, a faceless man. Only one group in the world possessed that kind of power, the Faceless Men of Braavos. She continued searching his belongings. Then she found a rolled-up scroll. The moment she opened it, her heart sank. Inside was a detailed record of Bran Stark's daily routine, exactly where he went, who he met, what time he appeared in public. It looked exactly like the kind of assassination contract the Faceless Men had once given Arya herself. There was no longer any doubt. Someone in Bravos had accepted a contract to kill Bran Stark. Arya couldn't ignore it. Without wasting another second, she purchased enough food, fresh water, and supplies to last the crew for 2 full months. Then she gave a single order: we're turning back. The expedition west of Westeros was over. Now, they were racing home. Far to the north, something ancient had awakened. The Night King had finally regained his complete body. As he slowly opened his icy blue eyes, he gave a single command. His army, rise. Across the frozen north, thousands of bodies that had remained buried beneath the snow for months suddenly began to move. Hands burst through frozen ground. Dead eyes opened once again. The army of the dead was rising, but this time, there was one major problem. After the Great War, the Children of the Forest had sealed the wall once again using an entirely new form of ancient magic. Unlike before, this enchantment was far stronger. The wall wasn't just standing, it was protected. And without Viserion, the Night King no longer possessed a dragon capable of breaking it. For the first time, even he had been stopped, or so it seemed. Without saying a word, the Night King mounted his horse and rode alone toward Eastwatch by the sea. Most of the Night's Watch castles had been destroyed during the war, but Eastwatch still held one important advantage. It was the only castle where ships could still reach the wall by sea. Meanwhile, Arya's ship finally reached Storm's End. The moment she arrived, she found Gendry and showed him everything she had discovered. The scroll, the assassination order, the evidence that Bran Stark's life was in danger. Gendry didn't hesitate. If Bran's in danger, I'm coming with you. Together, they immediately set sail for King's Landing. At nearly the same time, Jon Snow finally returned to Winterfell. He shared everything he knew with Sansa. As she listened, the strange paintings hidden deep inside Winterfell's crypts, the symbols, the stories, for the first time, they finally made sense. Realizing Bran could be in danger, Jon immediately prepared to leave for King's Landing. But before he could go, Sansa stopped him. She asked to speak with him alone. For a long moment, neither of them said a word. Then Sansa finally broke the silence. After Daenerys died, I couldn't stop them from sending you back to the Night's Watch. I've carried that guilt every single day. Her voice trembled. When we were children, I was never kind to you. I treated Robb and Arya like family, but never you. Tears filled her eyes, and if I'm standing here today, if Winterfell still stands, it's because of you. She looked directly into Jon's eyes. The North has never forgotten who its true king is. Bring our brother home. Unable to hold back her emotions any longer, she embraced him tightly and broke down in tears. The following morning, Jon Snow left Winterfell with a small group of his most trusted men and began riding south toward King's Landing. Back in the far north, the weather suddenly changed. Snowstorms grew stronger. The wind howled across the frozen coastline. Out of the blinding white storm, the Night King finally arrived at Eastwatch. Still mounted on his horse, he slowly climbed down and spoke a few quiet words in the ancient language of the White Walkers. His horse didn't react. It simply turned around and disappeared back into the storm. Now standing completely alone, the Night King placed both hands onto the freezing water. He closed his eyes and unleashed every ounce of his power. For several long seconds, nothing happened. Then the ocean itself began to freeze. A narrow trail of ice shot forward beneath the surface, traveling farther and farther into the sea like a living vein spreading through the water. Anything that touched it died instantly. Fish floated lifelessly to the surface by the hundreds. Miles away, local fishermen stared in horror as countless dead fish drifted around their boats. Every instinct told them the same thing. Something was terribly wrong. Without wasting another second, they turned their ships around and raced back toward shore. The frozen trail continued moving south, crossing an unimaginable distance beneath the sea until it finally reached Blackwater Bay. Then it stopped. The bay fell completely silent. Nothing moved, nothing stirred, only darkness beneath the water. Seconds passed. Then 2 glowing blue eyes slowly opened beneath the surface. It wasn't a sea monster. It wasn't another White Walker. It was Rhaegal, Daenerys Targaryen's dragon, the very dragon Euron Greyjoy had killed with his scorpion bolts. Now, he belonged to the Night King. Without warning, Rhaegal exploded out of the ocean. The force of his massive wings flipped 4 nearby merchant ships completely over. Sailors were thrown into the freezing water as the dragon released a terrifying roar that echoed across Blackwater Bay. Then, the undead dragon turned toward King's Landing and took flight. At that very moment, King's Landing was slowly beginning to heal. The streets were alive again. Buildings destroyed during the war were being rebuilt. Families who had survived were trying to move on with their lives, near the ruins of the great sept of Baelor. A temporary royal court had been established until the Red Keep could be fully restored. King Bran Stark sat in judgment, with Tyrion Lannister at his side as Hand of the King, while Grand Maester Samwell Tarly stood nearby. One by one, the people of King's Landing stepped forward to present their concerns before the king. Then, a grieving father approached the court. His clothes were torn. His face was exhausted. The pain in his eyes said everything before he even spoke. "My children," he said, struggling to hold back tears. "I lost both of them during the war." His voice cracked. "My wife survived, but Drogon's fire burned nearly half her body. I don't know how much longer she'll live." The entire court fell silent. Even Tyrion lowered his head. Bran listened without interrupting. When the man finally finished, Bran spoke calmly. Grandmaster Samwell will personally see that your wife receives every treatment available until she recovers." He paused. "But I cannot bring your children back." For the first time, a trace of sadness crossed Bran's face. "On behalf of the crown, I will see that your family's sacrifice is honored. You will receive enough gold to ensure that neither you nor your wife ever have to suffer alone again." The man accepted the king's words. But there was no relief in his eyes, no gratitude, no happiness. How could there be? No amount of gold could replace his children. As he slowly looked past Bran, his expression suddenly changed. His eyes widened in absolute terror. He pointed toward the sky. "Dragon!" Everyone in the court turned at once. A massive shadow passed over the city. Then, Rhaegal descended from the clouds. But this wasn't the dragon they once knew. His green scales were now coated in frost. Ice covered his wings. His glowing blue eyes burned with the Night King's magic. The entire city froze in fear. Kingsguard knights immediately surrounded Bran. Swords were drawn. Tyrion stepped in front of the king without thinking. Samwell instinctively moved beside them. None of them had any idea what they were facing. Rhaegal opened his mouth. For one terrifying moment, everything went silent. Then a blast of icy blue flame erupted across the square. It wasn't ordinary fire. It was death itself. The freezing breath swept through the crowd. Men, women, children, Kingsguard. Anyone caught in its path was instantly encased in solid ice. Within seconds, the square had become a frozen graveyard. People stood motionless like statues. Some reached toward loved ones they could no longer save. Others remained frozen exactly where they had tried to run. The silence that followed was even more terrifying than the attack itself. Bran looked around. Every person protecting him was gone. He understood immediately. If Rhaegal unleashed another blast, the entire court would be wiped out without hesitation. Bran slowly stepped away from what little cover remained. He walked into the center of the frozen courtyard, alone. Everyone who was still alive watched in horror. Rhaegal lowered his massive head. For a single moment, the dragon simply stared at Bran. Then, his enormous claws shot forward. They closed around Bran Stark, lifting him effortlessly into the air. "No," Tyrion screamed as he stumbled toward the dragon. But he was too late. With one powerful beat of his wings, Rhaegal launched into the sky, higher, higher, until he disappeared into the clouds, carrying the king of the Six Kingdoms back toward the frozen North. And the entire city stood in stunned silence. No one moved. No one spoke. Their king had just been taken, and somewhere beyond the wall, the Night King had just made his first move. What no one in King's Landing knew was that Jon Snow was already riding south. Arya Stark and Gendry were racing across the sea, and the greatest war Westeros had ever seen was about to begin, to be continued.